So good afternoon and welcome to day 4. Um, so today is the day that we dive into the notion of the wisdom of emptiness. So I will just begin by hoping I have the merit to teach this. So just to go over quickly the outline of our talks thus far. Basically, we set out a secular argument or a universal argument for ethics, a foundation that can be based on something than religious or moral values. And what this does is, if one can come up with such an argument as the Dalai Lama has done, then you get past cultural relativism, you get past the notion that people believing in different religions might have a sense that their values are more important than those of other religions, all of that. And more importantly, we said, because we also we looked at various disciplines, the notion of human nature, essential human nature, and we came to the conclusion that the modern consensus would be that we are a mix of being selfish and competitive and having all kinds of negative traits, as understood in the Hobbesian sense, in the Darwinian sense, and as also having an essentially very kind and compassionate nature as our fundamental human nature. So if we put these two things together, then we said that we have vast potential to develop our human nature in the direction of the foundation that is already there. So the analogy is really that if you try and squeeze a rock, you are not going to get oil, but if you squeeze a sunflower seed, you are going to end up with oil. So if the notion is that essentially our human nature has this component of being essentially kind, compassionate, and having lots of ethics and values, positive ones, then the question is really of developing that. And with the secular and universal ground, the argumentation is that we do not need some external kind of regulation, whether it's in the form of a religious opprobrium or some kind of fear and everything, but we ourselves internally have reason to, conviction and reason to develop our good qualities. Then we went into compassion as the great ground of a lot of other positive ethics, including nonviolence and many others that we can think of, trust and so on. And there are consequences of the world having believed a lot, being influenced a lot by Darwinian notions, Hobbesian and all of that, and also the discipline of mainstream economics. We cannot underestimate how influential it has been in where we are today in the world. And coming from an economics background, I will just reiterate that the political economy of how neoliberalism, which is essentially a kind of, unbridled type of capitalist agenda, which has really translated into oligarchy in today's times, including in the United States of America, where we saw in the inaugural ceremony of the president that there is, a large chunk taken up by the richest people in the world sitting together and also now influencing politics and influencing democracies and everything that the West has held dear since the Bretton Woods institutions came into being at the end of the Second World War in the last century. So at that time, the idea was that war was so costly for Europe and everything that, we create a stable economy, polity, society, definitely for the West and outwards from there for the rest of the world, with the creation of all these Bretton Woods institutions such as the UN and IMF and World Bank and all these. And the idea there was to create a great amount of stability and also non-violence and certainly not war. But what has happened is in the 1980s, you see the rise of neoliberalism. It is a concerted political project. It comes out with Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom, who's, it's very famously broke up all the trade unions, labor movements, all of that. You have that mirrored in the United States of America by Ronald Reagan. You have very influential thinkers at the University of Chicago, largely, who also take this and I will use the word ideology because it is an ideology. Two different parts of the world, including Chile and many other places, they overthrow governments and all of that. Allende and all that history is well known. There's a wonderful documentary called The Chicago Boys, and it's about all of this, right? It's about these economists who get trained at Chicago and go there. So now, 80s to now, we are seeing 30, 40 years of highly unequal, economically unequal, greater inequality all across the world. And there you see works like Thomas Piketty, the French economist. It's a large tome. He's talking about greater inequality, both intra-country and inter-country. So between countries and continents and within them. And as I shared, so that is really the backdrop of this scenario but now research is showing, though it is not as well publicized, there is research showing that in many areas it pays for both individuals to be cooperative and to have many kind of ethics that we tend to dismiss, because in this era of neoliberalism and now heightened by social media and technology and post-truth realities, we tend to think that, oh, how is this even possible, right? But there is research in every discipline, as I also discussed here in lecture 2. There is research in the frontiers of economics, social capital, and many other theories that it actually, if we are cooperative, if you have societies that have trust, it pays off for the society and it pays off for the individual. And it may be a more important trait to have than being competitive all the time and all this, right? So that was our second. And now in the third, we started going a bit deeper, and because you were still showing up and encouraging me, then I went into a little bit areas on the nature of suffering of our existence. And, I had the courage to do that. As I said, His Holiness has said in one of his books, don't talk too much about this at the start, everyone's going to run away. But we looked really at the idea of what is really the nature of our existence. And, I hesitate to use the prefix Buddhist here, because really many of us, like we discussed yesterday, if we have reached a certain age, we can see it. And if you have a lot of merit, you see it at very young ages. But, so we talked about, the 8 sufferings of human life, and then the different kinds of suffering thing. So today we are going to dive into the, basically just to recap, we are talking about our existence now as conditioned existence. That's the terminology I'm using, because this whole series of lectures is secular and universal, and I hope I achieve that, including tomorrow's teaching, by the way. So, involuntary conditioned existence, because we take a birth that we have not exactly chosen, we come into a certain kind of a life. It's conditioned because when causes and conditions gather, then something is going to fructify, right? So for all of us, for all of you to gather here this afternoon, you have, you got the email from Goa University, you cleared your schedule, you came in some vehicle, you cleared your own diaries, many things came together, right? So when the causes and conditions of something come together, some results are going to come, and that is really what the conditioning is. And we are saying here that miseries is a strong word, but fundamentally the nature of our existence, this involuntary conditioned existence, is suffering. And the way we talked about it, we said that the immediate cause of this is our contaminated actions. Contaminated here is just being conditioned by afflictions, right? So just colored by those, we undertake some actions. The most nice example I will give is, say, for example, I've found Pratna and Parish here very kind. And so, so based on my mental state, okay, let me take a negative example. Delhi traffic, you are very, very fed up and you just blow the horn, right? So that action of aggressively blowing the horn and trying to even drive some other driver off the road would be a contaminated action, right? The action is of a certain kind, and what is the friction that is driving it? I'm exceedingly impatient and also perhaps a bit angry. So that's the frictions that are driving it. What is the underlying cause of that? We said it's inappropriate attention, because I am looking at that situation as objectively terrible. Like, there's nothing, about it that appeals. It's like objectively negative entirely. That's inappropriate attention, right? We took the example yesterday of like, when you really see people as objectively nice and then after 10 years as objectively terrible, so you just see that from the object, it's like A or it's like B. So in this case, I'm seeing that situation as objectively terrible. And underlying that, we said, is the self-grasping ignorance, which we defined as a mind that misconceives the object to be objectively real, apprehends the object to exist in a way that does not tally with reality. So self-grasping ignorance, just to reiterate, is basically a mental state whose apprehension does not tally with reality, whose apprehension of the object does not tally with reality. And I would please ask you all to bear with me, because this is a very profound topic. So even if things at this point don't make sense, of course there's Q&A today and tomorrow, but you just listen through the whole thing and then so we are saying that self-grasping ignorance is the final ground, that iceberg on which all these other things are stacked. And this is a mental state whose apprehension of an object does not tally with reality, in the sense that it appears in one way and it actually exists in another way. This is the final ground and the cause of these other. And the source of these 5 profundities was Arya Nagarjuna's paragraph that we went over. So this is called the 5 profundities here. So that's what we think. Now, we said the shopping mall analogy for the way that this self-grasping ignorance and self-centered attitude plays out is that basically we said that this self-grasping ignorance is a mind which is, fundamentally, misconceives the nature of reality. That sets up a shopping mall, right? It kind of populates the whole shopping mall and does all of that. And then our self-centered attitude, which is wholly concerned with I and mine, it starts, performing in that mall. But another example that we can take for this conditioned existence, this involuntary existence that we have, is that fundamentally we are projecting things. We are completely unaware that we are projecting things. We therefore believe it to be very real. We therefore get affected. And number 5, we react, which is then creating further karma too. So that's another version of this 5 points that we can think about. Now, basically, the Buddha said, and that the only antidote to this kasata bottom layer on which everything, the base, this self-grasping ignorance, the antidote to that is only the wisdom of emptiness. And therefore, in the Nalanda philosophy and the Buddha's teachings, this is the only liberating path. And ma'am here asked a question about those 8 human sufferings and said we can't control A, B, C, D. We were going over that. And that's exactly the point. So if we want to get out of this whole scenario, what we have to do is basically realize the wisdom of emptiness. And it is a wisdom because it is knowing a certain kind of reality which tallies with how things actually exist. And to just quickly recap, when I said yesterday that, the Dalai Lama leading a conversation of Nalanda philosophy with science. The idea was not to get the ratification, but because in modern times, definitely the ontological reality between modern physics and between Nalanda philosophy and the Buddha's teachings have come very, very close. They are not identical, but they are converging, and that is the reason, right? So here we are saying that this wisdom of emptiness, of seeing actually how things exist as opposed to how they appear to us 24/7, and we misconceive them. This is the final base of the iceberg in the Titanic. If you smash it, everything else that is built on it in terms of this inappropriate attention, the afflictions, the contaminated karmas, the whole thing collapses, right? So if one is very intelligent, rather than trying to, sort out each of those things at one at a time, if you cut through this, you are out of this. Another analogy that is used that we can talk about is, basically we are living in a dream that we believe to be real when it is not. It's not so bad when the dream is a good one, like us all meeting the Dalai Lama in Balikupi in the dream. But when the dream is very sour, like a bad dream, then of course it's a problem, right? And the fundamental issue going beyond good and bad dream is we don't have any freedom in the dream to choose our dream, right? How many of us tonight here are going to be able to say here in the room that tonight I'm going to have a wonderful dream? We just don't have that freedom, right? So whether it's good, whether it's bad, we have zero freedom. Zero freedom is misery, and that is this existence. So now the only way to get out of that is that you wake up from this sleep of ignorance, right? But to wake up from that, you have to realize that you are in a dream, and basically the dream is not real, it is projecting from your mind. Similarly, our existence as it is projected, and we are completely oblivious about this, and we do not know, and we are treating it as if it is coming from the object side, right? So this is essentially the background. Now, to go into, so basically the two extremes and the two questions to ask in order to avoid falling to the two extremes. Now, what are the two extremes? So the two extremes, on the one hand, is nihilism, and there's an understanding of this in Western philosophy as well. But the notion that, there's no cause and effect, there's no sort of, things are equivalent to being imaginary, right? So here, it's just random that I happen to be standing and teaching, and there's no cause and effect, like, in the sense that you can do anything and there's no consequences to that. And, it's a dangerous kind of point of view, in terms of leading one's life, right? This notion that there's no functionality in operation, right? And there are many ways in which one can fall into nihilism, but primarily it may happen on the study and experiential level. And we are talking about this because obviously where I'm leading with this is an understanding of how emptiness is equal to the middle way, right? So that's the context of it. So if we fall to one extreme that is a completely nihilist, just rejecting that things exist, functionality exists, cause and effect exists, all of that exists. The other extreme is seeing things as seeing things as existing objectively real, completely from the side of the object, as that is how they exist. That is the other extreme. So now, to avoid falling in these two extremes, basically, and in general, whenever one is dealing with the topic of emptiness, there are very, very good idea to start with these two questions and end with them also. And I say this because even many people who are academics whose formal subject is Buddhist philosophy and who may be teaching it in the great universities, they often have mistaken this philosophy to fall in one or the other direction, and generally they equate it to going in the direction of nihilism, right? So in order to avoid that, two questions must be asked. Do things exist? Yes, very much so. Nobody is here negating that we are all sitting in this hall in Goa University. This is day 4. You know, it's pretty warm outside and all of this. There's the cause and effect. You know, things definitely exist. Then the question is, how do they exist? And just remember that we are constantly saying that self-grasping ignorance is basically a mental state that misapprehends the nature of reality. There is a discrepancy between how things appear and how we believe them to exist. There's a fundamental discrepancy there. So we are saying that the next question then, firstly, do things exist? Yes, 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 for sure. If you say no, you are falling to the extreme of nihilism, right? And if you say yes, then the question is, how do things exist? And here there are basically two choices: things existing subjectively as opposed to objectively. And remember, we had a slide way back. Subjectively, when we are talking, we are meaning from the mind. The role of the mind has a role to play. Subject is mind in this context, right? So subjectively means the mind has a role in how things. And if we say this, then we are basically rejecting the extreme of absolutism. And we are also coming to the point that things are empty of objective existence. But so in a sense, when we talk about emptiness, emptiness is not nothingness. Emptiness is a short form of emptiness of objective existence. Whenever you hear the word emptiness, in the context of this philosophy, you can always add the 3 words of objective existence safely. And in fact, you must, because it is just a short form of that. It is not suggesting that things do not exist at all. So now, you know, let's undertake a few steps, because going back to the title of this series of lectures, it was called The Middle Way View and Universal Ethics. And I was basically going to lead us all in the direction of why the Dalai Lama's every part of his life that he has lived and propounded as well is related to this view. And therefore, you know, his coming to the notion of universal ethics as well is related to this view. And we also said here that, you know, when you really get into it, you are able to think about the development of ethics in an extremely profound, stable, and internal way, which goes far beyond, you know, simple kindness or, you know, simply being endowed with a good disposition or something like that. So here, Arya Nagarjuna, this is his fundamental wisdom of the middle way, which is his key text. And of all the chapters, these 2 paragraphs basically summarize the entire text. And it is a very, very dense text. I don't want to put anyone off it, but basically, in order to study his text, it is a very good idea and necessary to go through the golden key of other Nalanda masters like Acharya Chandrakriti. I showed you his photograph, I think yesterday when it was on the slide or day before. You know, his quotation about compassion being important at the beginning, middle, and end. In his great commentary on this text, which is all about the wisdom of emptiness, but at the beginning he praises great compassion. So I showed you his photo there. So Arya Nagarjuna, this text is very dense, very profound, but, you know, extremely crystal clear. You know, he was kind of foretold as being the one who would clarify the Buddha's final stance really in a very profound way. So this verse says that which dependently originates is posited to be empty of independent existence. So here, these 2 lines merely mean that emptiness is not nothingness. Emptiness means empty from the object side or empty of objective existence or any of that, right? So basically here you are rejecting the extreme of absolutism. because you are saying fundamentally things are dependent. And it goes on to say that, that being dependently designated, this is the middle way. So this basically suggests that anything that is dependently designated means the object comes into being independence on designation by the mind or from the subject. So basically it is existent, there is no question of nihilism. So this is how this verse operates. But to go into it a little bit deeper, we are going to do a little bit of an exercise, and that is just to prove how emptiness is equal to the middle way. So basically, emptiness and dependent origination, these are synonymous. They mean the same thing. But they are different sides of the coin because, they just show different isolates of something. They mean the equivalent, right? They are synonymous in that sense. So emptiness, so let's take it in 5 points. Number 1 is emptiness. Number 1, as we just said, is emptiness is the short form of emptiness of independent existence, or emptiness is short form of objective existence, or any of those kind of synonyms. Number 3, emptiness of independent existence means nothing exists independently, because emptiness is basically a negation, right? So if you're negating something, that means you're saying that nothing exists independently, means everything exists by dependence. Everything exists by dependence means that everything is dependently originated. So basically, this is how emptiness is equal to dependent origination. Emptiness means dependent origination. And it does not mean nothingness. I will just keep reiterating that at every point until. And why is that so important? Because, if we fall into a nihilist kind of state of mind, then frankly, we are rejecting the entire kind of, functionality of the world and the sense of our lives and, any ground for ethics of our actions as well, right? Because there are some philosophical schools historically, like, who have been completely hedonist or something. They may feel that, none of my actions matter. Whether I do X or Y, it, doesn't lead to any kind of particular consequence of anything. There's zero functionality, zero kind of, any of that. Now, the second part, how dependent origination equals to the middle way. And this is extremely beautiful because the very term dependent origination rejects the two extremes, right? So we spoke about the extreme of, absolutism and the extreme of nihilism. So fundamentally, dependent, of course, it means not independent, right? Dependent means not independent. Right? I told you these philosophers, that's why, people ask me now that I've ordained if I'm in some chanting and all, and I really appreciate all those, but I had to describe to them that there's a lot of study involved here. Their doctoral is 22 years, sorry. So unlike most of our areas, which is a lot smaller. So dependent means not independent, because not independent, you are basically negating independence, right? So that's how it is equal to dependent, which then rejects the extreme of complete independence or absolutism, right? So it's rejecting this absolutism, complete independence of the object. And origination obviously suggests that something is coming into being, something is coming into existence, and therefore it is, all phenomena are dependently designated, they are coming into being through mental imputation, and therefore it definitely rejects the extreme of nihilism or nothing existing, non-existence, right? Origination, the very connotation that we have in the English word, obviously for something to originate, it has taken away the option of non-existence, right? And the dependent part has taken away the option of absolutism or complete independence from the object. So this is how then dependent origination is equal to the middle way, because you are bang in the middle, you've rejected one extreme and you've rejected the other extreme, right? Now, mathematically speaking, and you've stayed with me for 4 days, if A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A is equal to C, right? So if emptiness is A, dependent origination is B, and middle way is C, then emptiness meaning dependent origination is A is equal to B. Dependent origination meaning the middle way is B is equal to C. Ergo, A is equal to C. So emptiness is the middle way, and it is not nihilism, it is not absolutism. Now, if everybody is looking like they wish they were somewhere else, I do understand, because this is sort of like just a crash course into everything. As I said, if anybody wants more, and this is, then of course, I have been studying in Tibbet House for 10 years, and I plan to study my whole life till I drop dead, and this still won't be enough. So the thing is, that there are further courses and classes and things to so this is just really for you to get an overview, and so if things are not you don't, if you feel that there's a bit of fogginess or everything, that is exactly how it ought to be. And second, you also just listen to anything and let it roll off. If you don't even need to you just stay with my words as I'm saying them and not think about what has gone before or after. Now, this dependent origination can be taken at various levels, and this is the absolute beauty of this tradition. And I really have to say that, because I've had the best of opportunities to study all the subjects that I've ever studied with the best of the teachers, I have to say this is the most compelling. And if I were 20, 30 years younger, there's no ways I would be studying economics at all. So it would have been this philosophy, but sadly, I did not, happen to meet it at that age, and still I'm catching up as best as I can. So dependent origination, if you think about these levels, and so there are 3 levels. So we talk about the dependent origination of results, dependence on causes. Number 1. Then we talk about the dependence of a whole is dependent on its parts. And the third and the subtlest level is dependent origination of dependence on mental imputation and designation. And basically, when you have understood level 3, you have actually realized emptiness. So please, if it doesn't make that much sense to all of us, including myself, beyond words, that's totally okay, right? But I'm just putting it out there. Now, all these 3 levels are applicable to impermanent phenomena. So impermanent phenomena is any phenomena that is undergoing momentary change. So we are all undergoing momentary change, moment by moment by moment by moment. So we tend to think of impermanence, like I discussed yesterday and day before. We generally tend to think of impermanence at the coarser level of like the end of something, like the end of 2024, the end of a loved pet or family member, stuff like that, right? We think of that as being impermanence. But that grosser impermanence is only possible because the underlying subtler impermanence is, if we just go to that millisecond watch, millisecond, a lot of the watches have that thing now, we can see that is how, so even since I entered the room, everything of mine has undergone momentary change, and everything of everyone's has undergone momentary change, right? So impermanent phenomena is that, and here we are saying that 1 to 3 impermanent phenomena, all these 3 apply. For permanent phenomena, only 2 and 3 apply, right? And that makes sense because the first one is necessarily sequential, right? And I'll just come to that in a moment. But this makes sense, right? Now, the dependent origination of results depends upon cause. Cause and effect cannot be simultaneous, right? So, as regards a particular thing, they cannot be simultaneous. So let's take an example like, the start of this class and the end of it. These are necessarily sequential, right? Cause and result, in a way. You could say, or maybe the start, start is a cause of the end of it in a way, right? Otherwise, we can say cause and effect, like, putting on a kettle and hot water in the kettle, cause and effect, they are sequential, right? And in fact, our entire universe is operating on this causal dependent origination. And, basically we can take this at 2 levels, like one is what this philosophy would call the karmic cause and effect. So that is basically effects whose causes are linked to being's mental factor of intention. We spoke about that in the context of the 5 ever-present mental factors. But basically things like our experiences of happiness and pain and everything, that causal relationship is one type. And the other, what it posits as natural cause and effect relationship, right? Like autumn turning into winter, sunrise ending in sunset, things like that, right? So it puts it into these. But I think one thing that we can really start relaxing and, because like, I think one thing that I've come to, after coming in touch with this philosophy is a couple of things for the younger people here, how you can utilize it. And for all of us, like, basically in Cambridge and in modern education, and Professor Joanna is with us here. She's kindly taken time out teaching at Goa University, and also doing a lot for working on the issue of Tibetan refugees. So it's really kind of her to make this time. So the one thing that, we can think about, that's 2 ways we can use this, is number one, this cause and effect, right? So some of the younger ones, I'm looking in the students here, like say your goal or aim in life is to do a PhD, right? In, say, for example, philosophy, right? Now, if you want that result, basically you put in the causes for that, right? So what would the causes be? You definitely get an undergraduate in philosophy, you go for a master's, you study rather than sitting in North Goa beaches. Today when I was staying, the person was telling me, we were just talking about Israeli and Russian presence in Goa and all of these, and then they were sharing with me North Goa, and I said, I haven't even seen the sea yet, but I will go back without certainly seeing North Goa. So in any case, so you gather the causes, right? Now, it's not certain that you will end up with a PhD in philosophy, but there's a way greater likelihood if you gather all the causes that you will end up with that rather than if you don't gather the causes, right? This is cause and effect. Similarly, my favorite example, which I still have not tasted, if I want to make a bibinka, I have to gather all the material for the bibinka. I have to undertake the process of how to make it. If I gather the causes for biryani, I'm not going to get that result, no matter what, right? That can be guaranteed. So one way to use this cause and effect relationship, and then at a more profound level, like the way we've been talking since day one about our mental states, And we said, that all the joy in the world comes from wishing others to be happy. Now, for oneself, if you are gathering those kind of mental states, then you are gathering causes for, your future happiness. That result is bound to come sooner or later, because this is the effect of cause and result. I mean, this is the operation of cause and effect. Whereas, for example, my other favorite example, all the tech brothers and all the other people who are exacting war on people, and mostly women and children, the results of that is surely going to be suffering of a certain kind, including for the people who are enacting that, for sure, because it is the operation of cause and effect. So this is one way in which we can utilize cause and result, cause and effect. And I'm not saying that, we put in the causes and then we will get exactly the result that we are hoping for, but I'm saying that the probability of that happening is far higher. And therefore, and it is also at some level inevitable at some point or the other, right? And even the other thing we said in previous classes, that habituating your mind, there's nothing we cannot familiarize ourselves with. So again, that's the thing, put in the causes, sooner or later. And that's why in this Nalanda tradition, if there are some of the teachers who are in their 90s. There's one, the most venerable Professor Geshe Yeshithapkela, who 96. He landed from, I think, Vietnam or somewhere in Tibet House in the morning. He is still moving around on his own and does not even, he has a kind of a stick, but he doesn't really use it. And he also has somebody who's a little bit there with him just this year, from this year onwards, but even him, he doesn't take any assistance. He did a spontaneous Q&A on emptiness from 8:30 p.m. to 10:30 India time after flying at, and his answers was like, this is a non-affirming negative phenomena, and I don't want to go into that, but his answers were as if he was seeing things as clearly as us sitting in front of his. So that is the kind of mental state generated. And there's another teacher of Venerable Geshe-la, the most venerable Paladin Dhakpa Rinpoche, 92 or 3 again, you enter their rooms at any time of day. They are not sleeping, even during the day, which, we know how with elders in our own families and other thing, how it can be. The mental state is trained to such a high degree. So the point being here that they have put in the causes, and all these people would argue, and the many have said it in this, that they study or do things right up until the end, because they feel that the mental state, it carries on in the future, like unlike physical, like if you stop going to the gym and all, but the mental, of course, I don't have to do a PhD every second day, right? You do it once and then you in that subject area. So the mental, you are able to build in that sense, up, and it stays. So the point here, you gather the causes and the effect is going to be inevitable, maybe sooner, maybe later, maybe the fact of many other factors coming into being, like, for example, now I can say cause and effect, like I was meant to give these lectures, I came here, I put in the causes of preparing, I'm still preparing, effect is it's happening, but I can't guarantee that, okay, there'll be so-and-so attending, or this one, or this, or that I can't say, right? There are many other factors. But this brings me to the second point where we can all utilize it, because I, like, as most people in Cambridge and generally amongst my academic colleagues, I don't know if Professor Jarana feels, but there's quite a high level of, in modern education, sometimes a little bit perfectionism, anxiety, because also people are bright, competitive. And after coming to this philosophy, the other thing that I have felt a bit more relaxed about is that not everything depends on you. So, yes, you put in your causes. That doesn't mean you become the sluggard of the world. You put in your causes, you try your best, but outcome, you don't need to, because you are like, if we are imagining it, it's a whole interdependent web, and you are one cog, and every cog is really very critical, because if you disturb that, everything else. But at the same time, that cog cannot, make sure that everything else is going according to how they want it. It's not possible. And therefore, better to save yourself the coronary. But of course, you put in your, so this is another way we can use this cause and effect. And I think if one way to familiarize, oneself is to keep relating everything to dependency. In our day-to-day lives, we have a doctor with us. So, you'll see this all the time in your clinic. So I didn't catch your name, but Dinesh. Haji, Dr. Dinesh. Your surname? Verma. So Dr. Dinesh Verma, ophthalmologist. So obviously if I never wear my spectacles and I'm just going to him year on year, then sooner things are going to be terrible, right? Cause and effect. Cause and effect. And there's no need, we don't need, our whole universe is operating on this, so this one we don't need. Okay, I won't go into this, but this is one other reasoning that's very beautiful. Arya Sangha said that there are 3 conditions for this kind of causal dependency, that, for anything there must be a unique cause, right? Like if I want an apple tree, I must put apple seed. I cannot put, coconut seed, right? Then condition of impermanence, because for the cause to turn into the result, it has to undergo momentary change. And condition of potentiality, right? That whatever the cause, it should have the potential to become the result, right? The apple seed has the potential to become the apple tree. It does not have the potential to become a building, right? So anyway, again, the second level of dependence origination is whole's dependence on parts. And this is another amazing exercise which I'm still not doing enough of, because my mind is not habituated in that way, but one could spend years thinking about this. So you know how, like, wholes and, so now of course wholes and parts exist simultaneously. They exist at the same moment in time, right? My bag here, I mean, it is existing as like the whole and the parts is existing together. It's not in 2 moments of time. And now when we see that, the whole is basically dependent on the parts. This whole of the bag is dependent on, the strap, the color, the shape, the zip, the cloth, the texture, the everything about it, the parts. And in fact, and depending on what frame of reference, and by the way, frame of reference is very important in this philosophy, so it's very precise. We are always, so if now I take just the strap, if I now take the strap as the frame of reference, then it has its own parts, right? Then it's the whole with respect to its parts, which is like this kind of stretchy thing, the buckle, the shape, and this and that. But if I take the whole bag as the frame of reference, then it has its own parts, and we can carry on like this. If I then take the buckle as the frame of reference, it has its own parts. And we can keep going, subatomic level. There is nothing that is not partless. But there's been big debate. Some schools, lower schools, and some others would say, but there is nothing that is not partless according to this highest philosophy. And again, we can just, this is subtler, like just think about it. And again, I don't want to go into, but just see how things appear to us. Just see that, how this appears. Like it appears as there's just no dependency there. Like it's just an objectively real bag. And we never think about the dependency of the whole on the parts. We may, if suddenly the strap breaks or something, we might have one moment, but we'll quickly get used to the new whole. And we never think about dependency there. And, you know, because we only have on this topic like 1 or 2 days, so I really don't want to, you know, give you a sleepless night tonight because I still want to see you tomorrow. But the point is that if we really, what if I disassembled this whole bag and kept it there? Would it still be a bag? A whole of a bag? No, so there are all these past life Nalanda philosophers sitting in this audience. You're saying no, right? But exactly, just think about it. And then there's even been a debate that the special shape, like if I put it in the special configuration, is the collection, the whole, you know, all of this. But again, we can habituate our mind, right? Like if I suddenly spot Professor Joanna, you know, I'm seeing the whole, and then her dependence on her parts, her body, her mind, all of that. So the whole and the parts, and sometimes, like say for example, I have just met her yesterday in person, though we've been, you know, but say for example, I know her very well, or for say for her daughter, if she suddenly hears the voice of her mother, she is able to kind of quickly impute, you know, her mother on the basis of voice, right? So, dependence. And now this third level, I won't go beyond my pay grade, but I will just say that this subtlest level is really that everything comes into existence in dependence upon this imputing mind. And it exists only with the mind as the frame of reference. And this is very subtle. This is not saying that if I go outside this room, you will all disappear. This is not saying that if my mind as a frame of reference is not there, you will all suddenly disappear. No, please. Remember those two questions? Do things exist? How do they exist? You will be here. And that's why I locked my house in Delhi. Because even though I've become a monastic, there's some things in there like my thanka and all thankas and other stuff that I'm very attached to. So, but that's why I've done that, right? It is very much there. But what this is saying is that it is only in dependence on the imputing mind that things come into being. And, you know, so basically, we do this labeling, right? And we do this labeling like the day I was born, I was not born as Kaveri. I was born as whatever, and then my parents gave a name, and then after that, we just, you know, attach that object to that label. But there's nothing objectively that, you know, was, that made that object to be that, you know, objective label that we give it, like basically without that mind's role in this. And so basically the analogy here is that, you know, what I would like to leave us today is that we just go with this idea that of this movie projection, right? So we go to a cinema hall, we see the movie on the screen. But the movie is on the screen, but it is not coming from the screen, it is coming from the projector. So similarly, the movie of our life is coming, it's on the screen, but it's coming from our mind. It is not coming from the screen. And if we can, you know, really grab hold of this and understand, like what I have spoken about is there are many Buddhist schools in this, different tenet systems they hold, but I'm talking about Prasangika Madhyamika, which is, the most high school, and there's not a value judgment there in terms of lesser or higher, but it completely rejects even 0.001% of anything being there from the object side. And again, to reiterate to you, so the trickiest part of this particular philosophy, where the person that I am going to speak about tomorrow, his short text, Lama Tsongkhapa, has particularly excelled, is that, to square like 100% subjectivity with functionality, cause and effect. Remember, emptiness is not nothingness. Emptiness is not nihilism. It is not that we are saying that if everything is 100% subjective, it is imaginary, right? I cannot just imagine here that we are sitting, with the Dalai Lama sitting here and, giving us teaching, whatever. We cannot just imagine, right? Everything is operating according to its cause and effect and all of that. And we are saying that that is there, and then everything is 100% subjective, 100%. There is not even a single thing that is coming from the object side, like a single degree of objectivity on the object. So now here, the king of reasonings is called the reasoning of dependent origination, because what it basically does is that, as we said, the term itself stops you from following into any of the two extremes, right? Dependency is rejecting the extreme of absolutism, objectivity, inherency, all of that. And origination is rejecting the extreme of things not existing, nothingness. So it is said as the king of reasoning, and basically what we should be able to do when we have really, of course, this is just really, I'm just giving you a very taste of a thing. It is like, the bottom line is that we should be able to square like things existing entirely subjectively, things existing as mere conventionality, things existing 100% from the subject side, square that with the functionality of the world, with the order of the world, with, all of that. And, the Buddha of wisdom, Arya Manjushri, gives Lama Tsongkhapa this advice that please respect appearances, because that is the level at which everything is operating. So what did he mean by this? So how do things exist then when we say that they exist conventionally, subjectively? So the analogy given here is that like a children's game, everybody has a role, like you are King Arthur, you are so-and-so, you are so-and-so, and within that there are rules, and everybody is playing their role, and that is how we are getting along in this conditioned existence or samsaric life, right? That things are operating by convention, and it is purely through convention that things are operating. And this convention also has the connotation of coming from our mind, right? Like when we think of fashions and all, there was an age in the 80s when I was still alive and around and in my teens when, like, for example, permed hair was very in fashion, right? Those curly with the electric, basically you fried your hair into curls. That was a great fashion, right? That was a convention. Now for the last, the convention is straight hair or whatever, which is again ironed. That's a convention. So convention means coming from our minds because somehow we create a consensus that this is how it is, right? And at a more serious level, we have conventions like, driving on the left or right side of the road, whichever country this is operating, you better get it right by the conventions of that country, otherwise you will find yourself in your next life. Like that army saying I loved in Ladakh once, it said, if you drive like hell, you'll soon be there. They are quite dramatic. So anyway, so that's it. If you don't go by the convention of that country, you will be just, you know. So this is how things exist, but this is why, you know, Arya Manjushri is telling Lama Tsongkhapa, respect appearances and enjoy appearances, or, you know, don't fall into that thing that, you know, nothing exists and this is how I went for these lectures and they said that everything is, but understand that that is the level at which things are operating. They are not operating from, you know. So the way to get out of this, essentially this dream, which is a dream, but we believe this dream to be real. We don't think it's coming from the mind. We therefore have zero freedom whether we have a good dream or bad dream. And therefore that is misery. And the way to get out of that is to wake up from this sleep of ignorance. And that waking up can only be through the wisdom of emptiness, which now we saw basically emptiness equals dependent origination equals the middle way, right? So you basically grab hold of the remote control of your mind and you are, you know, and this is not some location somewhere in some heavens and something. This is all going on, you know, as Buddha said, like transform your mind thoroughly. Essentially, Buddhahood is in the mind and, you know, the final utmost potential, and I say Buddhahood, but we can take it as meaning our final potential. It doesn't need to, you know, it can be the highest form of evolution. That's in our mind, and there's nothing like, you know, that's some location or physical that we need to get to. So here when we say conventionally, subjectively, dependently, deceptively, these are all synonyms, right? Because conventionally, convention has connotation of coming from the mind, like we are saying fashions, rules, you know, maybe in 20 years, I mean, I pray and hope not, but maybe in 20 years, we have some new conventions that all the tech brothers are also political presidents or something. I don't know, and I hope by then I'm onwards and upwards. But this could be, you know, something like that, but conventions, right? Or we all think that democracy is where we were ending up, and, you know, like that poor Herbert Spencer, that was where it was all going to be the end of history, and now where we are going, who knows, you know. Maybe in 20 years, it is all authoritarian regimes, that is the norm of the world, and for anywhere to be a democracy, it's like a great rare example, right? It could very be possible. So conventions, meaning that, of course, this is not one single person, but they are coming from, you know, that children's play where we are setting up the rules of the game and we are doing it. Subjective means coming from the mind, independence on the mind. So dependence is automatically there. And deceptive, why deceptive? Because when appearance is one way and how it really exists is another way, that is the very definition of illusion-like. And please note that I'm saying illusion-like and I'm not saying illusion. Because in a pure illusion, there doesn't need to be any functionality, any order, you know, anything can come from anything. So we are saying illusion-like, we are not saying illusion. Because like I'm saying, we cannot will, you know, something different, just this thing. There is operation of all this functionality of things and, you know, cause and effect. And there are these last 3 slides, so we will just quickly go through them. So this, now there are 2 analysis, there are 2 mental states, you know, and this is, all minds fall into one or the other category. So the conventional analysis is, you know, a mind which does not go beyond how the object appears to our naked eyes or how we conventionally speak about things. That is conventional analysis, right? And the object that it finds is conventional truth. So if I come into this hall and I see Professor Joanna, I just see her and I'm saying, oh, that's Professor Joanna, that's Dr. Verma, end of story. That is conventional analysis, and they are existing like that, and I'm not starting to do an analysis is where exactly is Professor Joanna, right? Or I go in the evening to the supermarket and I'm like, can I have a coconut water? And the person gives me a coconut water and then that's it, right? So I have not gone beyond how the object appears And I'm not starting to ask questions about how it exists. Philosophical questions, right? You just take things at face value. You don't go into further analysis. That is conventional analysis. Now, if I start asking, where is Professor Joanna? Is Professor Joanna her mind? But the mind has no gender. Is Professor Joanna her parts? But she is not her parts, like, because she would say my arm or my leg and all of this. And if she were her parts, there would be multiple Professor Joannas. And there's only one Professor Joanna. And if there are a lot of contradictions, right? Now, when I start going into these, what I'm basically doing is I am starting to question, I'm going closer to see that does she really exist on the object as she appears, you know? Because as Arya Nagarjuna very famously says, if the mirage were to be water, why not those close to the mirage see water? So what I do is I undertake ultimate analysis. I cross the boundaries of conventionality, like her daughter would immediately recognize Professor Joanna, and everybody in Goa University would recognize, Tibetan students, Ladakhi would recognize. So now I've crossed all those borders of conventionality, and I'm saying, you know, I go close and I start examining that where. So mentally, I go close to start seeing that where exactly is Professor Joanna? Is Professor Joanna her voice? Is she this? Is she that? If Professor Joanna existed purely on the object, then there are only two options. Either she is one with her parts, body and mind, or elements, or whatever, or she is different from the parts. There is no third way that there can be an objectively existent Joanna. Remember, in ultimate analysis, I am not going to look for Professor Joanna. Professor Joanna very much exists. She's sitting here with us, and we can all see her, and she is there. And we are not going into nihilism, and also terrible philosopher behavior. I mean, that would be really, you know. So we are not going to closer to examine whether she exists or not. We are going to go closer to see whether objectively existent Professor Joanna exists. Objectively existent means entirely from the object, no role of subject. Objectively existent Professor Joanna, we go closer. We have crossed all boundaries of conventionality because, you know, all of Goa University, her daughter, her students, everybody recognize. Now we are not going beyond that level. We are going beyond to see how does she exist. Like, does she exist on the object? If she exists on the object, there are these two options. We see that, okay, Professor Joanna, is she her mind? No. Yesterday she was happy, today she is fed up with students or work or something, and this and this and this. We can have many, many reasonings, but essentially Professor Joanna is not the parts. And even when we go close, like metaphorically, the atoms of Professor Joanna, when we go there, Professor Joanna disappears, right? She disappears. So we see that, you know, definitely objectively existent Professor Joanna is not one with her atoms. And if we put away the whole complex of atoms on one side and Professor Joanna on one side, is she separate from her parts? We do not find any objectively existent Professor Joanna. And since objectively existent Professor Joanna can only exist in these two ways, because remember, again and again I'm saying we are not looking for Professor Joanna. Professor Joanna exists. We are looking for objectively existent Professor Joanna, and subjectively existent Professor Joanna can only be one with her parts or different from her parts. When we have rejected both those options, then we have to conclude that emptiness of the objective existence of Professor Joanna is what we have found. Professor Joanna, objective existence of Professor Joanna is what we have negated. It is the object that we have ruled out It is not existent. It is not to be found. How does Professor Joanna exist is entirely subjectively, or what this school would call merely conventionally. Why merely? Because there is not a single atom from the atom side, though she's there. She's an external with all the causes and conditions, you know, she just became professor recently, so big congratulations to, that's why I'm saying Professor Joanna, because I feel when people achieve such things, they have to be called with the full title for quite a few years. That's a rule that we made up during our Cambridge years of doing PhDs and all. So we have negated objectively existent Professor Joanna. We have not negated Professor Joanna. So then we say that Professor Joanna is existing conventionally, merely conventionally. Why? Because merely nothing from the object. But yes, conventionally, she's sitting here and everything, and just now, I mean, you know, we are not, there's no nothingness. There's no nothingness. So now then we come to, and this is almost the final slide, the Heart Sutra and the two truths. So everything has two truths. So we live in a post-truth world, but here they say everything has two truths. So this is a more sane world. So what are the two truths? Like with respect to the different frames of reference, you will find object is A and non-A, and both are correct, right? So what we are saying, the two frames of reference, conventional analysis, the object found by the conventional analysis is the conventional truth, right? So conventional analysis, I walk into this hall, I look around, I stay at the level of not going beyond how the object appears to my mind, and I see Professor Joanna, and that's the conventional truth, and she's there, very much there. I then cross the boundary of convention, and I start investigating how exactly does she exist. Then I go closer to the object metaphorically, and I think, and I'm looking for, if she is objectively real Professor Joanna, then there are two options only. Either she's one with the parts, different from the parts. When I have rejected both of theirs, there's only one conclusion that can be that there is no objectively existent Professor Joanna. Empty of objective existent Joanna is what I have found. Right? That is the ultimate truth of Professor Joanna. So the object that is found by the ultimate analysis is the ultimate truth. So every object has these two truths. There is Dr. Dinesh, and emptiness of Dr. Dinesh is his ultimate truth. His conventional truth is Dr. Dinesh Verma. The conventional truth of Goa University is Goa University, and the ultimate truth of Goa University is emptiness of Goa University. And we said that emptiness is what? Emptiness of objective existence of Goa University, right? Emptiness of Goa University is not rejecting Goa University. It is just rejecting the objectively existent on the object, 100% from the object. And this is the misconception that is at the heart of our being. So in the Heart Sutra, it says that an object is A and non-A, and both are correct. It depends what is your frame of reference. If my frame of reference is my conventional analysis mind, then I will find one object, and if the frame of reference is my ultimate analysis mind, I will find another, and both are correct. And every object has these two. So loosely speaking, we can say ultimate analysis is a mind which sees the object from close inspection and sees the ultimate truth, and conventional analysis which sees the object from a distance, like unexplored, unexamined, and it sees the conventional truth. So the Heart Sutra says, and these are very, very famous lines, and I will leave here, that form is empty. This is talking about the ultimate truth, right? So Professor Joanna is empty of objectively existent Joanna. All our emotional stirs stem from viewing the object as objectively real. When you find the emptiness of the objective self, of the flower or the self or whatever, everything that is stacked on this ignorance is shattered. Remember, we said that our self-grasping ignorance, that final Kasata base, is the mind that misconceives, misapprehends the nature of reality. So what appears to it is objectively real, and we believe it to be objectively real, and we are caught up in this dream that we believe to be real, and we are unaware it is a dream, and we are getting affected, and we are reacting all the time, and we are perpetuating that cycle. If we want to smash that, we need to look at the wisdom of emptiness, which is seeing how the reality actually exists, and seeing that, it is 100% subjective reality, our projection that is going on, and basically the remote control is on your hand, and you wake up from the sleep of ignorance, and this as soon as you are able to see this. So then the next line says, emptiness is form. So out of emptiness, out of that basic ground of emptiness, the form arises. All the diversity of this world, I'm American, I'm Goanese, I'm male, female, young, old, aged, fashionable, not fashionable, fat, thin, da 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 da. That from that emptiness, all the conventional truths of the world come into being. And basically, this is the level at which things are operating. Why Arya Manjushri tells Lama Tsongkhapa that respect appearances, respect all this, because that is where life is operating. I cannot tell you that, if I have a diagnosis of some terrible illness, I cannot say that, oh, this is just not there because now I'm going to think about something else. It is very much operating at the level of appearances, functionality, cause and effect, all of that is going on. But as we said, every object has these two truths. And then the third line and the fourth says, emptiness is not other than form, form is not other than emptiness. Therefore, they are basically, on every object has these two truths. It just depends on our frame of reference, which one we are seeing, right? So basically, the trick here, if we start seeing the emptiness of all things, basically we develop a great final degree of fearlessness. Because it's like being aware in the dream that it is a dream. And if we then combine that with a great amount of love for other beings and compassion for them and a higher level of that, we then are well on the way to attaining infinite happiness for ourselves and others, and very, very stable ground. So then there's a thing that with this emptiness, as explained, is thus meditated upon by yogis. No doubt there will arise in them a sentiment attached to others' welfare. So now this one, here yogis doesn't mean people doing yoga in North Goa. A yogi here is someone who has directly seen emptiness. Just to set that clear. And why will there no doubt arise in them a sentiment attached to others' welfare? Because we were saying the other day, yesterday, that there are various types of ignorance, right? Seeing impermanent as permanent, we feel so sad when people die and everything, or even I'll be very sad to leave Goa, it's a lovely place. Things like that, right? And then there are other types of ignorance. We said seeing impure as pure, seeing what is not happy nature as happy, all of that. But the final one is seeing, things as objectively real when they are not objectively real. And here Arya Nagarjuna is saying that when the yogi, somebody who directly sees this, and when they see how everybody else is not able to see that, there will arise in them a compassion that is extremely profound. And in this context, I remember that many years ago, this Foundation for Universal Responsibility that is instituted this chair at the University of Goa, and I'm extremely grateful to Rajiv Mehrotra, who's the trustee and secretary of it, and long-term a great inspiration and practitioner on this path. So they used to organize teachings where His Holiness used to come to Delhi in about the years 2009, 10, 11, roughly then, and now they don't happen. And at that time, His Holiness used to stay in a hotel in central Delhi where he was on the top floor. And that hotel is surrounded by a roundabout. And he said that sometimes, he said in the teachings that he would see out of his window, the world rushing about him, scurrying about. And all those beings, they are seeing things as objectively real and engaging with the world at that, level of, and for a being who is seeing these things exactly as the yogi described here is what is meant to be, that they are seeing the nature of reality for what it is, they would completely be overcome by compassion for, everybody driving around in that circus. Because, they have a fundamental misconception about the nature of reality that is basically keeping them trapped. So, thank you so much for, sitting through this one. And all faults have been mine. If I have really misrepresented by unwittingly or wittingly something or said something that is not correct, I really want to seek here also apologies, because, this is an area that I myself am a student of and hope to be always one of. And, it's been a great privilege today. I've been very nervous about this. So thank you for putting up with it. If there's any questions.
Something that is usually not easy to put forward. You cannot form words with a subject like this, but you've made such a brave attempt, and that has actually, at least personally speaking, has managed to break through or made some scratch or has gained its purpose. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This is a good, real kind audience, and also a practitioner audience, because I see from all your questions and observations, and I really mean that. So that's.
Can I talk?
Yes, please.
Maybe a very childish question.
No.
Is emptiness is an experience?
Yes. Yes. So what they say, G, that's a very good question. And firstly, I don't think there's ever any childish or any bad questions. We all learn only through questions. And in fact, this tradition is based completely on debate as a pedagogy. So there's a great, emphasis on asking questions, thinking of questions. So with emptiness, what they say normally is that the study, so there are three kind of ways of, absorbing or learning in this. So it's like study, then reflection, where you keep kind of thinking about, and the final is meditation. And in this tradition, there are two types of meditation. One is single-pointed, but the other is analytical meditation, where again you deploy reasonings to reach at a certain conclusion. So what they said about emptiness is that it takes perhaps much longer to study, but one may realize it, what you mean by experiential. There are different stages on a path. So the Heart Sutra, the mantra goes Tyata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhiswaha. And these, so it says go beyond, go yet beyond, establish yourself in final enlightenment. So these paths, accumulation, preparation, path of seeing, meditation, no more learning. On the path of seeing, you will have a direct experience of emptiness. which is then when they talk about in this tradition non-duality, because the subject object. So that is a direct experience. Until that point, based on study and inference. So, in the Buddhist psychology, they talk about various levels of mind. So you go closer, closer, closer. And firstly, through, you are getting at it closer, closer. So yes, and the yogis in this verse is the one who has seen directly. So then in this, the epithet for that kind of being would be Arya, or in Tibetan Phagpa. So, yes. But the reverse, and I haven't touched upon this, but in tomorrow, if we get time, that in the bodhicitta, which is, the highest, like, in short, it is the aspiration to become completely enlightened in order to benefit sentient beings. So there are two paths. So that part, which is all the, what we said, the ripening, the method side, every other practice apart from wisdom is related to that. That they say, like, if I had more time, I could explain to you in maybe 2 days or 1 day also, and you could get it. But to realize that, it could be lifetimes. Because, and that, so there are two methods there, the sevenfold cause and effect method, and the equalizing and exchanging self, another method. But these were the kind of secrets, like, when they spoke about this method, it was considered the secret. Why? Because not any kind of esoteric something, but because the final goal of that would be that I start valuing your interest over and above mine. So the other cherishing becomes much stronger than the self-cherishing. And now we can see that even in our dreams, we are starring in our own movies. So to flip, it's not that I'm going to become you in the equalizing, exchanging self and other, but firstly you flatten the ground between I and mine, and then I exchange, and the exchange is that your self-interest becomes more important than my own to myself. So that, of course, to realize is much. So that's what they say about the two things, yeah.
Okay, I think maybe the answer might be repetitive, but Mahadev, a little diverse.
Sorry, just one thing before you leave that, there was a printing on the poster. Tomorrow will be the last. It's not on Saturday. Yeah, because Saturday, I think, is also a holiday, or what? It's not part of the program. So just to put that out there, not to inconvenience anybody. Yeah, thank you.
When we say if form is empty, but form is everything as well.
Emptiness is form.
Yeah, emptiness is form, and form is empty. Then what are we?
So that is like you are form. Your 5 aggregates are form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. Basically an amalgam of body and mind. So here they use form as, like a metaphor, say like a flower, or you, what's your name?
Veda. Veda.
Veda. So Veda. Veda is form. Form is empty. So Veda is, you are there, right? We said you are totally there. Form is empty. We are seeing the ultimate truth. So, I go closer to see whether
What is
you...
the ultimate truth?
We said it's the object that you find through ultimate analysis.
What is that you find?
So that we say that we do not find objectively existent Veda. And what we are trying to negate is only objectively existent Veda, not Veda. Veda is very much there. Veda is 100% there. You will have tea just now.
No, I'm not asking about the fact that I'm there. When you say the ultimate analysis, when you separate everything and go inside, what is that you go inside to look for?
Objectively existent Veda.
What do you mean by objectively?
That you exist 100% on the object with no role of the mind. Sure, 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 sure. Sure, sure.
So it's really, really fascinating. I'm just currently reading another book. I told you about
Yes.
the Being You yesterday. This one is Rabindranath Tagore and Albert Einstein's meeting, in which they exchanged about nature of reality. It's actually an edited book by Partha Das, multiple authors. And it is so fascinating. At that time, Einstein was obviously the ultimate in physics.
Yeah, yeah.
And Rabindranath Tagore told him what you are saying now, saying that the reality is not really the reality, the objective reality. It is what we are projecting. I mean, Immanuel Kant had also proposed that before, but he was crystallizing it from a poetic point of view, philosopher point of view. And Albert Einstein didn't agree. Like, what you're asking is, what do you mean? You know, I'm there, my, what is mine? Does it exist without the observer? And then came quantum physics. And initially, Einstein was totally against the principles of quantum physics. But quantum physics is now proving that there are two truths. The particle can exist in two places at the same time, and it is entirely dependent on the observer
Yes.
of where you will find the particle.
Yes,
So
yes.
I think both are now sort of coming together, the spirituality, the poetic, the philosophy of consciousness. And again, in this other book, the consciousness is definitely a controlled hallucination.
Yeah, you were saying yes, yes.
Yes.
I think here what I would like to clarify that we didn't have time to go into, but I would say that the to be the precision of different schools, both within this tradition and non Buddhist schools. So, for example, what I have spoken about, as I said, was the Prasangika Madhyamika that rejects 100% objectivity, right? There are other schools that posit subjectivity, but not to that degree. And if I had to go into each of them, then of course I have to be here for a very long time. Then there is also the non-duality, as perhaps you are talking Veda or perhaps you are talking Dr. Varma, like in Advaita, Vedanta and other, there is a discussion of non-duality. But that is different, as I understand it, and I'm no expert. But there again, from my understanding, what is rejected is like the non-duality is there, that there is might be a cosmic consciousness or something, and the individual minds or whatever may dissolve into that. So in that sense, there's a non-duality. But here there is a subtler level, because we are also going to, A, there's no cosmic consciousness, but B, there's a dissolution even of the mind as being not objectively real. The final objective reality of everything according to this school is the emptiness of objective reality. So what I would suggest is, because like rather than conflating many different, because you know we are talking about, if you think about it, the reason that it's come very close to modern physics, or modern physics rather has come very close to it, then we can imagine that if I were to really know about modern physics, then obviously it might take me years and decades to, you know, understand it, because it's that complex, right? To do a PhD in physics or a, you know. So in that sense, I would say there is a lot of nuance and distinction here. And I'm certainly not the expert on all the schools, but I would not conflate, because sometimes, like for example, the term consciousness, here there's very much the use of the word mind, we could say, because consciousness can have many meanings, especially for traditions that believe in some kind of, you know, finally, what is the person? Is it mind? Is there a soul? Things like that, right? So A, there's confusion sometimes about English terminology, but more profoundly, I would say that non-dualism as understood by these various philosophical tenets, better to first keep them entirely separate and study each, because they, although they may sound the same, they may not come, there are differences, yeah. And certainly I know that, say, in the Buddhist tradition, there are the lower schools, Vaibhashika, Swatantrika, Chittamatra, Swatantrika, Madhyamika. Within them, there are the sub-schools. Then at least the schools that we've studied, like Samkhya, and many others, and extremely profound, and that is what on day one, when I was talking about Amartya Sen, saying the dialectical pluralism within the East. If you see the debates between these schools, and by the way, when I was taught one or two of them philosophic by a teacher, like, so the way our teachers have told us is that study each school like you are sympathetic to it, and that you are winning a debate on it. And only then you can be in a position to start rejecting. And when that happened to me, that somebody who's a great teacher starts presenting Samkhya very sympathetically, yeah, I almost got convinced. So what I mean to say is that I think, exactly as Amartya Sen has said, there's a great dialectical pluralism. The whole of this Nalanda tradition, after which this chair is based, is on that. And they had the tradition, by the way, that whoever debated, and if they lost the debate, they and their students had to convert to that point of view. And before you enter the university, there were 4 gates, and you had to debate. And they had the best debaters in each gate, right? So it was such a civilized, when you think about it in today's world where nobody wants to talk to anybody else, left, right, this view, that view, yet everybody just shuts down that, they just block somebody or do whatever. And that's not even talking about touchy topics like, philosophical views and all. But here it is all through dialectics and debate. And it's extremely beautiful. Because, for example, the text we are studying, Acharya Chandrakriti, now first, when they talk about self, first they debate with all the other traditions who believe in permanent, unitary, independent self, right? The great traditions of all of that. Then they go on to the schools that reject those, but within those schools, half of this wisdom chapter, which is almost the heart of this very profound text that I was saying, this commentary, it is just rejecting another Buddhist school which says that there is no external reality. But everything is the nature of the mind, but not the projection of the mind. So there are these subtleties, in terms of subjectivity, what degree, what are you saying? So I would say the safe way to be is to study each in separation first and very profoundly, and then, think about, because for some of it, certainly I'm not at all the expert in that sense.
My question leading from there was about rebirth, the belief of rebirth. So I don't know whether you're going to touch upon it tomorrow. With all this discussion, the emptiness and the consciousness versus soul and all that, what is it that is reborn? Like Dalai Lama, we say, is 14th rebirth of, and he remembers his previous birth. So what was that?
Yeah. So the thing is that rebirth, Dr. Varma, and I'm just quoting so there is a great text. There's Acharya Dharmakriti, his chapter 2 of Pramana Vartika is one of the key, where he argues for the notion of rebirth based on certain argumentation, in terms of, for example, like the way we know how to breathe and everything at birth, like there are some, but what my teachers would say, and that I have, is that basically with rebirth, there are 2 things, like empirical accounts of people remembering their past lives is, okay, that's there, but it cannot be really the proof for anything. And secondly, that, not to either accept it or to reject it that easily. Neither. Don't accept it so easily and don't reject it so out of hand easily either. And
curious. Remain curious to find out.
Yeah, and actually study, and go into it very deeply. Like, don't reject it out of hand, don't accept it out of hand, and cannot be accepted just based on people's accounts. And in terms of then rebirth, then there are two, like reincarnation of, big teachers and all, that is one thing. Rebirth for all of us, for sure. The foundation of, some of this is a belief in, so the proof is in this text. That's one strong argumentations that is given there. Um, and in terms of what, like for example, Prasangika school would say that I am imputed on my body and mind complex. I am not my mind, I am not my body, I am not, but I am imputed on that. So, and then there are different schools, right? Some schools will have different notions about that. But for this, I would recommend to you that, further study with, you know, teacher. Uh, and I would say here one thing, because you see, Tibet House, Delhi, like these long-term courses, like the 6 years masters that I'm doing now, the second one, and I'll keep doing it because unlike a modern subject, like once you know, then you just know, like say in our disciplines and everything, here there is a certain degree of, profundity, and we are going against certain, the ways of thinking and going to the heart of our questions, that heart of our existence in some ways. So I would really say that if anyone has any interests or questions, to find a good teacher and to really study with them is something I would highly, highly recommend. Because there's a degree to which you can understand things by reading books, but then it's beyond that, it's not very possible because the subject is so profound that many times, there's a translation issue, which one wouldn't know if one were not an expert. But the bigger question is that, some of it may just make total lack of sense. Because like, if we are saying the ontological reality of modern physics and this philosophy is the same, then just the way that I cannot become a physicist tomorrow, and based on reading some books on my own, I cannot. So that is why, back to the gentleman's question, that for emptiness, quite a lot of study is required.
Experience.
Hanji, but experience will only come after study. Because if you first don't know, like when people say just sit down and meditate, but what will you meditate on? Because as I said, in this tradition, there are two. Single pointed meditation to create stability of the mind, like candle should be stable to read. But then the analytical meditation is basically to, create a very clear understanding of what are we talking about. Because even with this school, for example, if I don't get the object of negation right, that's why I'm telling Veda that what I'm negating is objectively existing Veda. I am not negating, that Veda is a cat, or Veda herself, or A or B or C, because, if I don't get that correct, and it could take years and years of study to get the object of negation, then, the fires in the west and I'm putting water in the east.
These are causes that we are all putting into. And you had initially, even in the first 2 days, had said that the reason we are here is because we are all looking for the causes. We are looking into putting the causes. And then a point that Doctor brought up, based on also what you said earlier, is the observer. Once the observer sees questions, it's very difficult also to answer them because our mind comes into play, and we would understand it based on that conditioning. The more you give an example of my hand, my body, so there is something that is saying,
Yes.
that's the observer. And the more I start observing, the observer starts appearing more and more. And once that observer appears, then I will understand, that is what it is. Because going the reverse side to try to understand. First, when the observer is not there, it's very difficult to understand it because that's where the mind is coming. Where the mind is quietened, more empty
What's
of the
your name?
condition.
Okay.
Anita.
Anita. So this is a fascinating point because here they would say one way to catch the object of negation is the reverse, that it's quite shy. It's not shy like in the Samkhya school. They say that it's shy. If you, once you, it withdraws all the, here it is like if I start thinking, where is this objectively real Kaveri, I cannot, it may not come to mind. But say somebody enters the room and just gives me one. The immediate arising that, I sense of that is when you grab it.
Yes, that's when my mind is not in operation, and me, the real,
Objectively, I.
Objectively, I is present at that time.
That
That's when
sense.
there is a smash of that bottom of that, maybe a chip in that iceberg,
Yeah.
or not the full smash, but I feel a smash, a little chip and chip and chip does happen along the way, and that's where it's not about understanding. That's where the moments come up when you say, oh, okay, that is what it is, or that is what is meant, or that is what that meant.
Yeah. I
Whatever
think
it
here,
is.
yeah, Anita, this objectively existent I, to see that in relation to oneself in moments of great fear, great anger, great emotion, like if I feel a plane is going to crash, that sense of I that comes up, that is when we see this objectively existent I, which does not exist, but appears very clearly. Because if I sit on a cushion in a calm, sometimes it just eludes. Because when you start looking for it, at that point, so as you're saying, and then we can examine whether one with the parts, not one with the parts, then where is it? You are merely imputed Veda. Merely imputed on your body and mind. There is a Veda existent. Very much. Self-esteem is very much related to your conventional self and cause and effect, and everything is operating there. You are a fantastic, like we said, merely imputed Veda or conventionally existent Veda is totally there. That you have high self-esteem because you're a great student, a great daughter, whatever, your five reasons, right? It's totally. It's very much operating. We are just doing this exercise to see if there is an objectively existent Veda. And when that is not found, we are rejecting objectively existent Veda. We are not rejecting Veda. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you.